I remember this panel is called "With the Great Earning Power Comes Great Responsibility, Why Brands Are Stepping Up for Sport Integrity." And I call Kate Bevan. She will be moderating this panel, and all its panelists. Michael Robichaud again on stage, please. Hallie Price, Aldo Caffey, Miguel Farinha, and via Zoom we have Clementine Painter. And I can say a few words about this panel. When you come in, please, with Kate moderating this panel, it seems clear that sports federations aspire to be more sustainable, successful, and accountable, and fans demand a greater transparency. In this reality, it begs the question, what role can sponsors play in facilitating positive change? How are sponsors impacted by scandals like match fixing, governance issues, lack of protection to the youth? Do they have a larger responsibility to the future of sport that extends more traditional boundaries? These are the questions to be answered now. To you, Kate.
With power comes great responsibility, and there's a lot of power on this panel here. So we're very lucky to have some of the people we have here, in fact, all of the people we have here. I think we have one remote attendee, from Clementine from Adidas. I'm not going to spend a lot of time doing biographies and introductions to these guys because it would take up the rest of the day. It's all in the pack, and I think the captions show where they come from. So we have on this panel some pretty heavy hitters from the world of sports sponsorship and funding. And my job for many years in Formula One was to market Formula One to potential partners. I'm now on the other side of that, and I'm taking commercial partners into Formula One and navigating their way through it. And the one thing I've learned over the last 20 years is how much the landscape has changed in sports sponsorship. I fundamentally believe that there is a crucial role for sponsors in effecting change on the integrity issues that SIGA has been set up to promote. Sponsors have a huge responsibility. They are investing millions and collectively billions in sport. The world of sport would not turn without the funders. You can call them sponsors, you can call them partners, but effectively they are funding sport. And it's right that they try and protect this investment. The reputational risk has been high on the list for most sponsors for a long time. But more than that, if sport stops being relevant to its audience and stops listening to the social concerns of its audience, then I think it no longer deserves to take the money. But let's hear what some of our experts think about that. I'm going to address the first question to the three sponsors that we have here, representatives of sponsors. We have Michael Robichaud from MasterCard. We have Clementine, who I think is joining us remotely from Adidas. And we have Haley here from Tata Consultancy Services, or TCS. And I'd like to ask you all an opening question on this. You've all seen sponsorship shift primarily from a branding awareness piece to a more integrated sponsorship model. Is the next evolution a greater push from sponsors to see social values properly reflected in the sports they sponsor? Is this now a thing? And what's your experience in bringing governance and social issues to sports rights holders? Has it been resisted? Has it been welcomed? Has it been misunderstood? That's not two questions, that's one question with a part A and a B. Haley, let's start with you. Do you see this as a thing now?
Well, at Tata Consultancy Services, it's always been a thing. Our sponsorship strategy has always been purpose-led. And just for some background, TCS is a global IT services and technology consulting company. We really help Fortune 500 companies with digital transformation. And we're best known in the sports world for sponsoring the world's largest marathons. And now, how that all came about was really an authentic, humble, values-driven way, where our then CEO and now chairman of Tata Group started running late in life, and it really transformed him. And he thought, wow, look at what it's doing for me. I got to bring this to my employees, and he started a program called Fit for Life, which was a gamification system that rewarded our employees for physical fitness activities, and now we've had hundreds of thousands of employees go through that Fit for Life program. And it snowballed from there. We saw what it did for our employee base, and we wanted to bring it to our cities. We wanted to bring it to our customers. And we really believe that running has the power to transform lives. So that is 100% our value base. And I just want to ask, how many runners are in the audience? Okay, how many of you know a runner? Okay, I think that's everyone, right? So this is the halo effect of running, right? And this is why we now sponsor 15 marathons across the globe. And I guess for the second part of the question, how are we injecting governance and starting to have those questions? And I think it's so important to have those ongoing conversations with our partners. We've had some of our partners now for 5, 10, 15 years. So we're constantly talking to them about their what they're doing in terms of their stance and social pressures and how they're answering consumer demands. And it's important for a sponsor to really also demand that as well. One example is we're building it into our partnerships up front. So for our newest title sponsorship in Toronto, the TCS Toronto Waterfront Marathon, even before we get to the negotiating table, we're asking them, how are you measuring your social competence? How are you measuring sustainable efforts? How are you comprised? How is your workforce comprised? How are your athletes measuring up here? And we're actually building into the contract there. Now, this can be a little scary, right? You know, we're having these conversations before we even sign the deal. But we want them to know that we are a partner in this. So, for instance, technology as the official technology consulting partner, we pledged 30,000 technology hours to help them achieve their certification standards in terms of sustainable efforts. So it's right there, it's in the contract, it's up front, and if it's not in the existing contract, we encourage amending.
It's interesting that you approached it from the point of view of a partnership, which I think is interesting, donating a whole load of consulting hours to help them to achieve the aims. I think is a really nice way to approach it. So well done for that. I think, is Clementine here from Adidas? She is. Clementine?
Yes, I'm here. Yes, I'm here. Hi, everyone.
Bonjour. Adidas is without doubt one of the big whales in sport sponsorship. I was going to, doing a bit of background to this, I was going to print out all the sports that Adidas sponsors. So, of course, I went to Wikipedia, and it was 80 pages. So I saved a lot of printer ink by not printing that out. But there is almost no sport that Adidas doesn't touch. Clementine, you are one of the big investors in sport. You have a Standard & Poor rating of ESG rating of 79 out of 100, which is impressive. And there's also almost no sport that you don't touch. Can you give us an insight into what issues in sport now are keeping you awake at night and your approach to addressing them?
Of course, Kate. Thanks a lot. And hi, everybody. Sorry not to be in person, but I'm actually in Barcelona at a EuroLeague event where we are also talking about people and planet. So yeah, I mean, for years, our core belief at Adidas is that through sport, we have the power to change lives. We are now having more and more conversations with our customers, with our clubs, federations, and on those people and planet conversation. It's not anymore only transactional conversation. It's how can we join forces on those topics. We don't have the pretension that we have all the answers. If you look at the 17 UN goals, one of the most important one to my mind is the 17 one, was the partnership one. And this is really something that we are pushing, not necessarily pushing, because we don't need, honestly, our customers and partners are opening their arms to have those conversations. We to Hailey's point, we don't even need to put in the contract. It's a conversation that is coming naturally.
And that's interesting. It comes back to this idea of partnership, which is interesting. I was speaking to you the other day, and you were talking about the global partner days that you have, and how you join forces with your properties to see how you can push forward the agenda. And that's really interesting. I think I've been fascinated in talking to you all at how these initiatives have been received by the sports rights owners. Is there pushback? Is there resistance? Is there misunderstanding about what the brand is trying to achieve? Michael, you represent one of the biggest investors in global sport and have been for many years. You've also been a long-standing supporter of women's participation in sport, and that's way before it became popular. So congratulations on that. You're a founder member of SIGA, so there's no point in asking you whether you believe that the fundamental principles of integrity are important in sport. We can predict the answer. So instead, do you think that we're at a pivotal time now? I'm thinking how sustainability has come to the forefront now. Diversity and inclusion is now at the forefront. Poor governance in sport is being more widely reported than perhaps it was before. Is real change happening out there? And where's it coming from, do you think?
Change is definitely happening. I would say, what resistance are we hitting? I think breaking these old habits and old structures and having people understand that these things are not only big and important, but they take time, they take effort. Thank you for mentioning sustainability. That's the one, if anything, that keeps us up, just because the reporting standards and the expectations of what we're all going to do from a sustainability point of view is not easy. And I would say sports probably fairly far behind just from a basics of reporting and understanding. A lot of people, they're saying the right things. We're working on recycling. We've done some very interesting things ourselves with some of our other partners, but I can tell you from the expectations of whether it's 2030, 2050, depending on what your timeline is going to be, then you add diversity and inclusion, you add hiring, you add the investment needed in women's sports that does need to be there. I would say, again, a lot of people are saying sort of the right things, but it doesn't take long to maybe go to the offices and start asking a few basic questions and going on little tours and starting to say, well, how does this work? Who goes there? You know, what systems are in place for the female athletes versus the men? There's still a lot of work to be done, and I'm not sort of calling anyone out or being negative about it, because I think everyone's trying to be very positive, but there's a lot of work to do. There's, hundreds of years of ways things have been done that needs to be broken and changed. And the thing that I've been surprised, that's, I actually spend most of my time now outside the U.S., but over these years as I've left the U.S., so many of the sports out here are sort of, as we've said, sort of self-regulated, right? The voting members vote each other in and kind of perpetuate the systems in place, and that's the biggest challenge. And I think that's why SIGA and having these conversations are absolutely critical, because for us, they're not optional. These are, in almost any brand you can think of, whether they're really good at it or not, but they're trying really hard. It's absolutely critical. This whole notion of shared values, and anything you spend your money on, you're basically saying that we believe in this and we believe that you fit us and that you're in the same space as us. And if they're not, then that's a problem, because in our case, it's almost 3 billion cardholders on the planet. Yes, it's MasterCard's money, but we represent all those folks. So everybody using that card, they're looking at something saying, well, hold on, is this where I should be as a consumer? And that could be for Adidas or, and all the amazing things that they do from a sustainability and many other areas. But that's what we're all accountable for. None of us are going to be in these chairs months or years from now without understanding that these are where the world is going and what people care about. Whether you're an employee, a customer, a government, you're a person, and we're all trying to figure these changes out, because change is happening in a lot of places, in a lot of areas. And I will say, I understand from the sports point of view, it's a lot for them to keep up with. They're getting a lot thrown at them. I don't feel bad for them, but I just know that there is a lot being thrown at them that needs to be on the forefront of their thinking and their daily efforts, besides just winning the next competition.
But I guess that's where SIGA comes in. It's a resource.
100%.
It's a place that a sport can go to that has a dedicated program in supporting and helping them address this.
Well, that's what's been amazing, and I think what from the beginning, and one of the reasons that we were so supportive and the people that I've gotten to know and worked on it is, or at least something I was personally insistent on, is this needs to be a positive effort. This needs to be something that, as Emmanuel would say, it's name and fame, right? This isn't about shaming or doing the wrong thing, because I generally believe everyone is trying to do the right thing. And I think all we're asking is just, if you don't know something, raise your hand and say, hey, hold on, we're maybe not as good as we need to be in this space. What can we do? Because I do think everyone is wanting to get and move forward in different areas, and it's hard. Like I said, I don't feel bad, but I also understand that this takes a lot. It takes resources. It takes hiring. I mean, how many times do we now read someone's now just hired their first diversity and inclusion officer, or they're now looking at a sustainability person. They're looking at these different, you have to have people that know what they're doing. You can't just say, oh, we care about it, and then go, okay, well, who's in charge of it? Oh, so-and-so down the hall. It's like, well, do they know anything about it? So that's why, there are resources, there are people out there doing it. There's so many ways now for those that we all meet that want to get in sports somehow. There's so many ways to do it. So if you're an environmentalist, it's a great place to come, because everywhere from growing grass and using water and flying and the future of fans even attending events. You want to start bringing up a scary topic, what happens when they start saying we shouldn't have as many fans at events, because that's being talked about, because how do they get there? They use fuel and they, so this world is changing, and technology is going to help, right? We have great partners that are going to help on the technology side, but we have to talk about it. We have to figure it out. But you're right, the SIGA is there as a totally positive support mechanism, and the rating system is great to lay it out and what your roadmap needs to be.
Well, I think it's interesting what we're getting from this. I like the idea. If you go to any sport and you say to them, do you share our values? They're going to say yes. Right, you need more than that. And I like the idea of due diligence beforehand. I like the idea of a checklist of, well, okay, well, you share our values, and that's fantastic. Can we now see where you are on these issues? Because the more you keep asking the question, the more the sports will understand that answering them becomes important, especially if they've been asked them more than once. And then you go through a contractual process where you can build it into your contracts. And Clementine said she doesn't do that, but I think if Adidas asked a sport to do something, they would do it. So maybe they don't need to put it in a contract. So I think that's interesting. Aldo, from Octagon, you and I were talking about your experience in sport. As an agency, you've done everything as an agency, from representing athletes to now becoming a mega agency representing rights holders as well as sponsors. So that's interesting, because it gives you a different perspective. Or it gives you a view from all sides. Have you seen this perceptible shift in attitudes from your sponsor clients towards the ESG agenda? And in particular, I think you've got some very interesting experience that you've had in the South American market.
Yeah, 100%. And good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me here. I've seen it definitely shift in the spectrum. If you think about it, brands build that trust and authenticity in the marketplace, and they want to make sure that nowadays who they're partnering with is going to share on those values and make sure that that trust and that authenticity isn't at risk. And so what that has led to is more due diligence. And I love what Haley said, is asking the right questions, asking the how questions, not what they state, but how. How do you do it? Because I think that's how you get down to the bottom of whether they're actually, the property that you're looking to partner with is doing things the right way, or even if there are areas that you can work with on it with them, so that you can actually put a unified front end on the marketplace. I think what we've seen from our clients is that it's not just about the commercial assets of the partnership anymore. It's what are all the other endeavors that particular property engages in? What do they do in their foundations? How can we build in assets that are more social responsibility led into the partnership, so that it does look like a true partnership and not necessarily a commercial endeavor?
But I don't know if anyone else has had this experience, but there is always, within any organization, and my experience is within sport organizations, the tendency to silo. So they'll say we have a head of diversity and inclusion, and we have a foundation, and we had a head of sustainability, but they are never allowed into a commercial meeting. It's like, we've got them there, they sit in the back, we tick that box, that's done. I think possibly the next stage for sport to address is integrating those more thoroughly into the beginnings of the organization and the beginnings of the commercial discussions. I don't know whether you've had the same experience, any of you, with that.
I think it's certainly a tension, and it's certainly an area of improvement because you do have a lot of the commercial conversations that they may bring in maybe, let's say, the basic aspects of how you can work with their foundation, with their diversity and inclusion efforts. But once you want to make sure that those things are actually actionable once the partnership kicks off, and the earliest that all of those sectors, and you're right, a lot of the properties probably still do operate it in a silo, and some of them may be because of governance, that the way that they need to operate, but the more that you bring them into those conversations early enough, the better off you'd be.
I want to say that I have our sustainability managers and DE&I and officers and at all of our partners on speed dial, and I'm not afraid to call them up all the time. So I don't know, maybe we're a different type of sponsor where there are no walls, right? There are no barriers anymore. We want to know what's going on, and we keep it very conversational because they know we're invested in for the long term. We want to be helpful in this process, and I just want to know what's going on. I think without the transparency, there cannot be trust.
I think it's the culture of the sport usually too, and the size of it and the revenues and the sales, because still you still have these worlds where you're dealing with the front door of the sales folks, right? We call commercial. It's they look at us, they say, hey, they're playing us off our competitors. They're selling their side. They've got their revenue goals. They've got their expectations. So they're if you bring it in big enough, then they'll say, okay, well, this seems like it's going to matter for the sale, so we'll bring it in. I think some of the other groups that are making it more of their foundational, again, that's where we talk about, is it part of your culture? Is it really part of your culture because you would want to brag about it? I don't understand if it's that great and you're that committed to it and you're that committed to investing in women's sports, for example, or the ESG goals, you should bring it to the forefront. And if you're not, there's probably a reason, and I would challenge those sports and those organizations to figure out how to do it, because we're going to ask. We're going to ask. I mean, and we need to know, and it's important that we know that gets there. It's not just trying to get that deal across, which is that old culture, that old sports. Who gets the cover stories on all the magazines? It's the salesperson, right? They're the ones that, good for them. They're the geniuses that went and sold something that we bought. Okay. But that is part of that culture. So now we are pushing back and we're saying, well, hold on, we have to do more than just get those commercial rights and those things to grow our business. It has to be part of it. And again, I think most of them are coming along, but they just need to understand and again make it part of their kind of front line versus something that we kind of check the box later.
Miguel from Ernst & Young, one of the big four, another big beast in the room here. A consulting firm with significant interest in advising sport, and again, like Octagon, at many levels. So that's advising federations, funders, the money behind it, the rights holders. So you have a good perspective on this. You're looking at it, again, from all sides. So again, I'm not going to ask you whether integrity is important in sport, because you're going to say yes, otherwise why were you here, right? But what I'm going to ask is tackling integrity in sport, putting a process in place, head on for a sport, is that good business?
Thank you for the question. Thank you for being here. Obviously, I will have to say yes, it is good business. It has part of sports to do it, and I think it's more and more important each day to enter on that route. If you think on the key issue that any corporate is facing nowadays, and ESG that most have mentioned, the corporate and social responsibility issues, those are also related with integrity in sports and all of these topics. So if you are able to face those and to reply to those, this is clearly important. And if you think on the world where we are today with those topics, we said Generation Z, which takes more and more importance on these topics, and they are the ones that are seeing sports nowadays, and they are the ones that are influencing buying from the brands. Again, another important topic. Also, one thing that for us at UI it's quite relevant here, it's the purpose-driven organizations. We are nowadays a purpose-driven organization. We have our purpose. Ours is to building a better working world. And this is not some vacant words that doesn't mean nothing. We are really committed on bringing best things to the world. In our specific case, it has to be more with the confidence on the markets, with developing our people. But that confidence on the markets, I can give you an example. We are over the last, and I'm speaking nowadays specifically from Portugal, we are a partner from Liga Portuguesa de Futebol, where over there, what we are doing with them, over the last 5 years, it's building an annual report about the financials of supporting of the sports, of the entity, of the football entity. And that has to be also with that corporate responsibility. We have to show and bring it to the world that football, it's not only what you see on the newspapers about this transfer or that penalty or that referee or that champion, but also this industry generates this amount of money, this amount of employments, this amount of taxes paid, and bring clarity to those. And that's clearly important. And it has to be, and it's clearly a good business for anyone involved, from the brands, from the sports agencies, for the athletes as well. And we can see nowadays the importance for athletes on that field.
Well, I think we've seen the trend. I mean, there are many indexes that show that those companies that embrace integrity issues, ESG issues, perform better on the market. So we've seen, those studies have been around a long time, and they've been pushing companies towards the ESG agenda. I think one of the reasons is for that reason. It is good business. I'm interested in whether it's good business for sport, and if so, why? How does it enhance the value of a sport? They can carry on, they can do their broadcast deals, they can take their sponsorship monies, and they can sell their tickets because they've got a passionate fan base who are going to turn up anyway. So, you know, is there that imperative in sports, unlike a corporate organization, to make this, to see this as good business? You can't keep beating the stick and saying you must do this otherwise. Well, you can, but it's also better to say to them, it is good, it enhances the value of your sport. And I'd be interested to see whether there are any studies or whether anyone knows of any measurement for that.
This from our side, I don't know any specific study that demonstrates that, but for me that's also an empirical conclusion. It has to be like that. It does not make sense if it's not like that. For sport itself, if sport itself are not following on this route, it will damage their reputation. And the brands will get away from that if the reputation is damaged. I think at the end of the day, you have to guarantee that you are complying with those, to guarantee that you are aligned with the purpose of the brands that are investing in sport. And you don't have those two together, it will not work.
And I go back to my first question with some of you who are the sponsors here. What is the resistance or the misunderstandings you've met when talking to sport? Has it Michael, you must know this, hasn't been an easy ride all the time. There must have been some difficult conversations, and the route out of those is interesting.
It is, and I think part of what was being talked about is that the world is changing, and again, when you talk about markets being made, right? So from an ESG point of view, we're now accountable to the SEC, at least in the U.S., and I'm sure if I was better prepared, I could talk about how it's going to be outside the U.S., but I know we're going to be accountable for those things. It's not just about our revenue and how we're doing all these things. We've been now hearing for a number of years about activist investors or private equity that are specifically investing and targeting, right? So the whole circle of who's bringing the money, what their expectations are. There's a sort of an organization in the U.S. called the Business Roundtable of all the CEOs, and even they came out a couple years ago and said they essentially changed a very core definition of the value of a corporation. I mean, when I went to business school and we all were raised, the number one and sole purpose of a corporation was to return value to the stockholders, the people that invest in it. That's our fiduciary responsibility. Well, that's been changed now. The change is that it's not just about making money. We are responsible for doing good things, and we're responsible for the environment and the world we live in, of the people we serve, the countries we work in, the governments we support. So the vocabulary and just the whole world that, again, most publicly traded organizations around the world and governments are talking is different. Sports still kind of getting there because it's not a requirement, right? I mean, if you work at a club or an organization, unless the boss is telling you this is part of your job, if they're always saying, look, we want to do good things, but by the way, your number one bonus is going to be determined by your sales, you know, right? What's the old phrase? You get what you reward. So it's just still watching those, you know, the how is such a fantastic question. I'm totally stealing that because it's digging deeper into, well, what are you really doing? You're saying it, and I see it in the deck, but are you really doing it and putting it in practice? Is it really a part of you? Or are you just saying because you know you should say it and you kind of have an effort here? Because that pressure does have to come. And I don't know if it's beating with a stick, but I certainly know everyone's chasing those dollars. The costs are going up, stadiums, you know, all the requirements are going up. So they need the money, whether they want to admit it or not. So whether we beat it into them or just walk away with our dollars, which will happen, we just have to, or maybe the increases aren't there. But it's going to take time. It's going to take things like this. It's going to take us walking in each and every meeting and saying, okay, where are you with your hiring? Why am I talking to all men in this room? Whatever it might be, we have to ask those questions. And again, hopefully in a positive way and giving them a chance. I usually try to give them a chance to brag. You know, tell me, oh, you must be doing great things. Tell me about them, right? Don't just tell me about your fan base or your you know, whatever it is you're selling. But we just have a different accountability system. We just, as brands and businesses, the public and the whole world holds us accountable differently. That's why I still find it a little surprising that sport watches these things from the sidelines and doesn't include us in major decisions. And I won't call out some of the sports. You can probably figure them out from the headline these last few years, but they're still talking to themselves. They're still talking amongst themselves about who's in charge and who gets to do what and how the money is going to be shared and who's in charge, you know, all those different things. And that's fine, and they have to run their business and do their things, but I'm still a little surprised they don't include those brands, and mostly because we can help, right? We have, like you said, you've got them on speed dial. We just call these people. We'll help you with your hiring. We'll help you with with recommendations for DNI officers. I get calls for that all the time. Hey, do you know anybody that would be a good chief diversity officer for us? Sure. You know, I probably placed the number myself. So those types of things are in the dialogue, and they just have to keep happening.
But I think one of the differences with sport, and I completely agree and take your point on how the world seems to be moving with sport a couple of steps behind, is sport is a different structure. It's not a corporate structure, it's a federation. Most often, not always, but most often it's a federation structure. And it's kind of like run by its fans. It's kind of like run by its clubs, you know. So it has a whole different set of restrictions on it and bureaucracies, and it's sometimes the corporate world can clash a little bit with the structure of federations, which can be a lot more bureaucratic, can be a lot more diverse in their decision making, and I think that has an extra layer of challenge in bringing these things, pushing these things forward. Because they're answerable to their member clubs, and are their member clubs demanding this? And you know, I think it is more tricky to push this agenda in sport. But I think I'm not sure there's anyone here who wouldn't agree that you're also right that sponsors will eventually walk away. You know, and I think we've seen sustainability was the first of the ESG issues to get pushed through. That was, you know, 5-6 years ago. It started going much more mainstream in sport. You know, diversity and inclusion is the issue of the moment. Women's sport is huge. Representation of women in sport is very poor, I think. And I don't know whether any of you have a view on how that's changing. Haley?
Well, I mean, with running specifically, luckily we are about 50-50, and actually stepping into more heavily women for running in sport. And it's been great to see a lot of female leadership for quite a long time. I've been working in running for, 18 years, and having a lot of women mentors up front. So from that perspective, they've been really strong, but there is always work to be done. And we've seen it in the last few years, and there's been a real reckoning at all levels, athlete levels, leadership levels, in the staff rooms, everywhere, where everyone's demanding more and better of our partners. And it gets a little awkward. You talked about awkward conversations that have to be sometimes held about, like, well, what are you doing about the board makeup? How are you recruiting new staff? You need to get with the program right now, because they're at risk of walking away. They're at the risk of losing their fans and athletes and customers, and we are held accountable too. I think we talk about how younger generations are demanding it. Our employee base, our average age is mid-20s. So our employee base also is almost 600,000 people globally. So they're an incredibly important stakeholder as well. So we're not just talking about our customers and our communities, but we also are talking about our employee base, and we're accountable to everyone, not just auditors, but ourselves.
Clementine, if you're still there, I think gender inclusion in sport is a subject of great interest for you, and you've been promoting a Breaking Barriers program, I think. I was going to ask some of the panel here, and I'll start with you, whether there are any particular campaigns that stand out for you, whether you've been involved with them or not, that tackle an ESG issue in a really neat way. Are you still there? Can you talk to us about breaking
Yes.
barriers?
I'm still there, thanks, Kate. I had a lot of comments, but couldn't squeeze in. So no, overall, I'm fully aligned with my colleagues on the panel. Yes, we know we have a lot of studies showing that girls are dropping out of sport around their teenager age because their body is changing and they don't know who to talk about that because they don't see role models on TV, X, Y, Z reasons. So basically, we decided 3 years ago to launch the Breaking Barriers for Girls project. And you call it a campaign, Kate. Actually, we are very insistent on the fact that we don't want to call it a campaign because for us it's a long-term commitment. It's a 5-year commitment at least because we don't want to stop there. It's a 5-year commitment to support non-profit organizations on the ground that are using sport to tackle social changes. Basically helping those non-profit organizations to get better at hiring more women coach or to attract more girls into their programs. We also empower local leaders, so women who are working around this community of this non-profit organization to implement gender equality project in their community. So they need to organize a sport camp just for girls, or they need to organize workshop for boys and girls because it's not only a girls and women conversation. We need also allies. So we need boys and men in this conversation. And ultimately, by the end of those 5 years, we will have inspire more than 50,000 girls. And we started to also connect some dots. So our partner Benfica Foundation, for example, was meeting with one of the non-profit organizations that we are working in Portugal. I'm talking about Portugal because this is where you are, everyone today, so CAIX. But we have 12 organizations already working on those topics and 3 more next year. It's a topic that we really wanted to put the focus on because if you don't see it, you can't be it, right, for those little girls. So yeah, it's a very an amazing project. I'm in Barcelona right now, and I was visiting another partner yesterday, La Rodiana, in Badalona, one of the most difficult neighborhoods next to Barcelona. It's very, very inspiring to see how the non-profit organization and the local leaders, so those girls, are fighting and to lead the change.
I think diversity and inclusion are one of the more difficult topics. I think that governance, you can almost write the script. You can go to SIGA and you can look at your governance structures and you can put in place the correct processes and procedures, which is the first base. Sustainability, I don't know if none of us alone will save the planet, but sustainability, there are many established routes through to improvement. I think with diversity and inclusion, it's much more tricky, it's much more nebulous. There is, certainly with gender equality, a lot of unconscious bias in sport. I'm heading up a project at the moment to find a woman Formula One world champion. And if you think about it, there hasn't been a woman in Formula One for 46 years. That's unacceptable. It's just unacceptable. And that tells you something. It's systemic. So I think that diversity and inclusion is a systemic issue, and I think that's one of the harder ones to tackle because of unconscious bias. Are there any particular projects or campaigns that you've been involved with that help with that you think have worked? Any of you, Michael?
It is an amazing topic, and it's, I've probably spent half my time on it, and as the 50-year-old white guy, it is a very dangerous, and you get a little nervous, right? It's some place you're trying to figure out the vocabulary, you're trying to do the right thing, so I think you just participate, you just go for it, and hopefully when you make a mistake, because we will, you don't do too bad. And so as we look at this topic and talk about it, I think on the women's side, it's from a diversity, I think that's I want to say a little bit easier from the conversation, right? It seems pretty obvious, half the planet's women, certainly from a credit card company, you can at least say at least half the transactions are done by women. So from a business point of view, it's something obvious and something we should be doing a whole lot better. I still find it interesting, though, that some of my challenges are with women that still talk in that traditional language of, well, what are we going to get for it, or what's the return in that traditional business language. And the more I've reflected on it, it's not for probably any, there's many reasons they probably talk that way, but I think part of it is they don't want to be seen as, well, I got this job because I'm advocating for women, or I am a woman, and whatever it might be. They got it for the reasons they did, because they're good and they earned that role, but they don't want to necessarily be seen as over-biasing and fixing something. So I think everybody on both sides of, at least in that conversation, have to kind of navigate their way through it. But it takes time, money, and effort. I mean, it's not going to happen easily. But hopefully we're, at least on the women's side, we're past that point of should we be doing it? Should we be talking about it? We're well past all of that. I think some of the successes we've seen in certain sports with stadiums getting sold out and athletes becoming household names and little metrics that we look at, little boys walking around with a female jersey on as opposed to a young girl wearing a Messi jersey, right? So that's flipped. I've been to enough women's matches and seen little boys just going crazy because their favorite player is wherever she is. So the culture is evolving, and as the generations go by, like many other things, it'll get there. But from the business side, it still costs money. It just does. The tickets, you can't charge as much. Most sports still don't have that equality that they should. Tennis, I guess, is a leader from years ago. Even then, I probably have a couple of tweaks they could do, right? And they're the masters at equal pay. But these are conversations that have to be had, and they take time, and they take a little bit of art. But the goals have to be set. And if one of your goals is a female champion, I think that's a fantastic goal, because as you probably already figured out, the millions of things that have to happen to get that one person to that podium is going to affect thousands of people.
It's like very many of the things we're talking about today. It starts at grassroots. Yeah. You have to start at the very bottom. I think all of the projects that we talked about today have started at grassroots level, and that's where you have to build in a lot of your diversity inclusion from the bottom.
And one thing to remember, Valencia said, because Adidas is such an incredible brand in so many levels, is we get so serious about this. If you watch little kids play, we're reminded it's sport, it's fun, right? How many videos do we have to watch to see kids, whether it's the Middle East or around the world, that are getting to play sports or do things, young girls playing, and they're just so happy, and they're just so having fun. It's like, okay, let's stop for a second, take a deep breath, and remember, we're not doing this for whatever. These are kids that just want to have fun. Yeah. And maybe if they haven't had the chance, then they need to, and we all need to, if we can figure it out from there and keep them going and find out why is it they stop at certain ages or what those barriers are, that's really, I think.
Well, that's where I think work like Adidas are doing with NGOs, because the nice thing about the Adidas project is they're saying, we don't know the answer. So, we sell shoes, so we don't know the answer. Let's go and talk to the people who do know the answer. And I think that's a really smart approach, because you go to the NGOs who may be able to help you find a path through, instead of coming up with a campaign or a project that might look good on Instagram but actually doesn't have any effect. So, well done. I think that's a great way. Haley, you are busting to get in here. What have you got? What have you got?
Yeah, well, I just think if we're going to demand this of our sports partners, I think we need to admit that we need to lead by example, right? So at TCS, we have diversity by design, and it is thorough, not just with gender, right, but looking at all aspects of diversity, including accessibility, people of color, LGBTQ communities, and making sure everyone's represented and it permeates all levels. So we have great examples of how this is coming to life at TCS, which at IT services company historically is more male-dominated, right? And sports is more male-dominated. So I think we need to show how this can be done and take those examples to our partners, and then we can be part of that process together.
Yeah, exactly. And you're a technical company, so you need a lot of you need a lot of girls coming up through who are STEM qualified, right? So you need to, it's a matter of partnering with your sports to develop school STEM challenges, because you've got to have enough girls coming up for you to be able to recruit them. And I think that smart partnerships with sports can really amplify a brand's own objectives and their own, as well as the sports themselves. So those kind of smart partnerships kind of make sense. You've got one with Grid, with STEM in schools, haven't you?
Yes, we have a pretty robust CSR program. So our pillars are health and wellness, which comes to life many ways through our running partnerships. And then we also have a sustainability pillar, and making sure everything we do is accountable and measured and tracked and verified and certified. And we put together an excellent sustainability report every year. But then we also focus on STEM education. So that's through Go IT, which really serves underserved communities across the globe. I think we have now served 5 million kids around the world, making sure that they are set up for future careers in computational thinking and incorporating that computational thinking in really all disciplines. I mean, we're not just talking about traditional STEAM, right? We're thinking about how do you incorporate computational thinking in history and literature and beyond, because that's really going to permeate everything that we do, and making sure that that kids that don't have opportunity do have that exposure to careers that will set them up for success.
Okay, I think we've got to wrap up now. I think we're running out of time. What one piece of advice would you give to any sport, not each of you? What piece of advice would you give a sport who are worried about ESG issues, governance issues, and how to tackle them? You know, coming from it from agency side, from consultancy side, from sponsor side, you've all lived it and you've done it. What's your one thing that they should do now, today, to take the next step in this journey? I'll start with you again, Heli, because you're at the other end and I can work down.
I mean, we got to look to governance, right? You got to look to your foundation. How are you measuring? How are you being accountable? And we're not trying to boil the ocean all at once, right? And we're not, I think that gets overwhelming. Focusing on immediate small actions while setting the foundation for the long term with good governance.
Yep, that's perfect.
Yeah. I'd set goals and make a plan. I mean, you got to have a vision and make a plan to get there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think to add on, because I think governance and having a plan is very important, but also be open to the partnerships, right? We talked about how the intersection of properties and brands that have amazing resources and services that can actually help you bring you along. You don't have to do it alone, right? So figuring out how to create that true partnership where you can help each other out is very important.
Yeah, agreeing obviously with all what's been said. I think on terms of the goals, it's quite important what SIG is presenting with the independence rating system. Having a framework of compliance and refine that this is happening. We are somehow applying the same rating criteria, the same independence procedures to all, guaranteeing that it's being applied. I think that's crucial on this topic as well. So
that's great. You must hate SERVs, because nobody's going to pay EY to come and do their governance. It's like it's all there. So you're talking yourself out of a job there. Clementine, have you got a piece of advice for our audience?
I would say, agree with what Hailey said, like step by step, small actions. And actually would like to give everyone, the panelists, but also the audience, the opportunity to join us and take the first step towards creating a more inclusive and gender equitable space in sport. So we have launched an open source tool, totally free, accessible for everyone. It's called breakingbarriersacademy.com. So anyone can go to this link and go through different modules to educate or get better at gender equality and make the first step.
Great. Wise advice. Thank you very much, everyone, for this panel. It's been fascinating, thoughtful, and a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Thank you.